Hello witches and witch curious people. I'm Colette, welcome to my channel, and today I want to do a book review on the herbs and magic of Beltane season. I find it amazing though for any time of year, and the way I like to review books is to actually share a few things from the book in detail so that you learn something from this video, not just whether or not this is a great book. So put a yes in the comments if you want more book reviews. The book I'm reviewing today is The Sacred Herbs of Spring, Magical Healing and Edible Plants to Celebrate Beltaine by Ellen Evert Hopman. And this is an incredible book. She focuses on herbs, but there is more folklore and research and magical information in this book related to the traditions of the holidays than I see in books that are dedicated just to folk magic and tradition. I highly recommend this book. Part 1 of the book contains chapters about understanding the Celtic cosmology and primers on fairy lore, helpful spirits, and herbal preparations. I love having a cultural context for the work that I'm reviewing, and I also love that she shares so much herbal preparation information in the beginning, because that means you don't have to be a skilled herbalist to actually work with this book. You can just look it up if you come across a term that you are unfamiliar with. Probably some of you have heard about the old witch practice of digging up mandrake root and using it in spells, and that it's fairly complex. And one of the things she shares in this book is how to create a plant spirit charm from mandrake with very detailed instructions. She also mentions that ash root, dandelion root, or white bryony root can also be used, which to me is really helpful. She goes into a lot of detail, including the moon phase, when this charm should be started, how to know if the plant wants to work with you, different stages and kinds of offerings and incubations of the root in order to use it properly. And this is an amazing multi-stage spell that I'm not going to go into in detail here because it's so long. But she is definitely on top of it with this one, and this is one that I am going to try because I haven't worked with mandrake before. I might also just shift it and work this way with dandelion. I find it very interesting that you can use it similarly. Section 2 is very extensive, and it's about the magical herbs of Beltane. But again, it was way much more than I expected. And she starts this section with a description of the 9 sacred woods that were used in traditional bonfires for the holidays of the Wheel of the Year. And they were willow, hazel, alder, birch, yew, elm, and oak. And she also shares that the 9th one could be either apple or pine. And she also mentions that magical bonfires for the sacred holidays of the year were typically started by friction, even long after matches were commonly available. And what that means is they would take an oak plank, bore a hole partway through it, and then rub a stick of oak back and forth in between their hands in that hole, and then as sparks emerge, they would feed those sparks. And that there were a couple of interesting herbs that they used to feed those sparks, specifically mistletoe, but also agaric, which is a type of mushroom that grows predominantly in birch and pine forests and is somewhat related to amanita, so it could be a little toxic, but that's what gets the fire going, and they just feed those magical herbs until you have a small fire. She also shared a way to prepare the ground underneath a traditional bonfire, and this particular version of it comes from the 1700s in mid-Scotland. And so what they did is they started by making a square in the ground and then digging a small trench around the edge of that square, leaving a square of turf or sod intact in the center. And then they cooked an offering food made of eggs, butter, oatmeal, and milk. And whiskey and beer were also given as offerings. And she goes on to share more about that ritual in detail. But one of the things that I found really interesting about this is that butter, oatmeal, and milk are all traditional offerings for land spirits and for the Fae in Celtic regions. Eggs are particularly associated with abundance and fertility. And in several Western European and Northern European cultures, I see milk being used as part of spells and magic to remake the earth fertile again. Maybe that's something we can use in our time magically. And in other places, I have read about an old 11th century Anglo-Saxon spell for blessing and re-fertilizing and re-nurturing the land. And it's called Aetherbat. And it also includes milk and cutting squares in the turf. And this time the squares were cut from the four corners of the land. And then you fed the milk on the bottom part of the turfs. And then they were blessed in Christian times by a priest, and then they were replaced in the four corners of the land as an offering to make the land fertile. And I found this in a book on old Anglo-Saxon charms. So that info about the 9 sacred woods and the spell for refertilizing the land is just the very first chapter in section 2. And the rest of section 2 contains chapters on herbs of the fairies, elves, and spirits, herbs of magic and mystery, herbs of protection, herbs of purification, herbs for connecting to other realms, higher beings and visions, herbs for courage and clarity, herbs for love, fertility, and abundance, and edible Beltane herbs and flowers for magic and ritual. Another thing that I really liked in section 2 was that she gives recipes for lilac flower scones and lilac flower cookies. I'm definitely going to make those. And I also love her recipe for borage sun and moon flower tea, which I'm going to give here. And again, she credits her source of inspiration from which she got this recipe. And so the recipe is 1 part pansy or heart's ease flowers, 2 parts holy basil leaves and flowers, 2 parts borage flowers, 1 part lemon balm flowers and leaves, and 2 parts lavender. And that just sounds dreamy. I love that. I'm also going to try and make that as well. So she instructs you to put the herbs in a glass jar, cover the herbs with water, and then allowing it to sit out in the warm sun and under the moon for 1 day and 1 night, and that you should do this during a waxing or full moon, and then add honey or lemon to taste. This is probably just one of over 100 recipes or food uses she uses that are magical or traditional, as well as talking about the magical properties of the plants. And in this case, all these herbs were about the sun and welcoming the sun and leaning into that energy, and also borage and heartsease or pansy as the primary ingredients were about fostering courage and boosting the strength and vitality of your heart so that you can shine and be more of who you are in this world. And section 3 is all about the traditions, rites, and foods for the Beltane feast itself. And she offers examples of rituals to do, full-on rituals that you can use as is or adapt for your own use. And I've done a fair amount of research and practice over the years into folk magic traditions, and it was really delightful to me that I found something she elaborated on that I thought I knew all the folklore there was on it. And I even talked about this practice in last week's video on Beltane. So she's talking about the maybush, which is a large branch or the top of a tree that was decorated with flowers and ribbons from the hawthorn tree that was placed just outside the door. And I loved finding out that in addition to hawthorn, people also used rowan trees sometimes. And she also says that yellow is the color of the flowers that were hung or decorated the tree. I didn't know that. And that people would even use ribbons that were yellow and dye eggshells yellow to hang on the tree, and that they were left up for a full month and then burned in a bonfire. And I didn't know any of that. In section 3, she also talks about the strong connection between wells, sacred springs, and Beltane. And there's also a person on YouTube called Nature Folklore who talks quite a bit about holy wells, springs, and water. You can check out his channel. He's got some great information. And she also shares a form of the ritual for making a wish at a holy well, which is to walk 3 times around the well clockwise, offer a coin or a silver trinket, which is called silvering the well, and drink the water as you're holding your wish or need in mind. She also talks about the practice of leaving kloots or klooties, and that's pretty controversial. Some people in the modern world see them as trash, but they're actually a very old and strong tradition. And what it is a strip of cloth that was left as an offering or part of their wish, tied onto a local tree right near the well. And sometimes people also left gifts of food like cheese and bread near the well. And this whole thing about walking 3 times sunwise around the well, I was told a similar version of this when I was in Ireland. The nuns at Kildare, who are responsible for holding and keeping the holy well of Bridget and her sacred flame, told me about this and said this is the way that you correctly approach a well, is to walk around it 3 times sunwise first before you do anything. She also talks about well dressings, which is when you decorate wells or sacred springs with greenery and flowers, and that this was typically done on the first Sunday or Monday in May. Children would also decorate what they called fairy pools deep in the forest and surrounded them with white stones or pebbles, because all white stones belong to the fairies. And I find this particularly fascinating because, as a little bit of an archaeology geek, I know that white pebbles have been found on special sites and in early graves in Western Europe for at least 6,000 years. And the practice was continued into very recent times. And I don't think it's just fairies that these stones were sacred to. These fairies are clearly a modern word for certain kind of spirits. And 6,000 years ago, we have no idea what they were offering these pebbles to, or who or why they were being marked in this way, these special sites. One way that you could adapt this to your own practice would be to find white pebbles and to place them in a ring around a bowl of water, and then also add greenery like ferns or leaves and then flowers, and do a blessing on the waters of the world. Ask that the sacred springs, the holy waters above ground and below, be protected and safe. And I wanted to say that most of the books I read out there about witchcraft are just not dense enough or have enough information for me to share excerpts from them without revealing the whole book. This book is dense and it's filled with so much information. What I've shared today is probably like 1/1000th, if even that much, of what's in this book. And I'll put a link in the description for those of you who want to buy this book. I don't make any money from this. I'm just putting it out there as a resource. For some reason, the algorithm has been a little bit weird for me lately, so I would really appreciate it if you would comment, like, and subscribe and share my videos. And let me know also in the comments if you would like me to review more books, if this is something you find useful. And I really appreciate all of you who do that on the regular. So there's links in my description for my monthly newsletter, which is tips and seasonal and moon magic that you can do at home, as well as announcement of upcoming events. So until next time, stay safe and be well.